Cascade Mountains. This is S-4! Sit back, relax, and keep your eyes to the skies.
Greetings, folks, and welcome to S4, where we talk about the serious issues involving paranormal and current events, coming to you live from the S4 headquarters in the heart of the Cascade Mountains in the studio in Cape Horn, Washington. So, it is November 29th. We hope you have survived the chaos of Black Friday, if you went. Tonight, we're discussing American witches. We have Aubrey Zell from Church of All Worlds and Green Egg Magazine, amongst many other, a plethora of other books he's written, presentations he's done, the American Council of Witches. And we have Ed Hubbard from, from Witch School. There we go. I've had a bad day. From the Witch School. You go ahead, Ed. I know you've written some books too. You've done presentations.
Actually, I do mostly. So one of the things I do is I try to give voice to the pagan world. Pagan Tonight's Radio, Magic TV. This year I did festival work. I was going to do a roundabout. Oz inspired me to do a roundabout this year, and ended up doing festivals online. Very much a student. So you leave out some of the great parts of Aubrey Zell. Aubrey Zell is one of the people who brought us a glorious amount of freedom to be witches amongst as an overall group of pagans. But I'll let him talk for himself. There you go. How's that?
Excellent. You know, so you and I have never actually talked. I mean, I've watched you over the years. And Oz and I have actually never met. I actually started talking to Oz when we were in Iraq, and I was leading a pagan group in Iraq. That's actually where Aubrey and I made a connection. And I'm not sure if you remember that, Aubrey. That was...
Yeah, I remember.
That was 2000.
That was wild. We talked about...
That was 2004, 2005. Because we were in Balad.
Yeah, that was quite a while.
Yep, that was years ago. And so much has changed, and that's why we wanted to do the show tonight. Because, I mean, it sounds to me from my military connections that paganism has been a little bit more accepted in the military in the last 10 years compared to when I was in. When I was in, I mean, we actually had the battalion get threatened with an IG investigation for harassment of our pagan group by our own Christian chaplain. He threatened the battalion.
Wow.
You know, and we'll go more into that later in the show. I want to start though with where did we come today? So, paganism in general was done in America before the Puritans got here. We know that much. But really,
there were pagan elements for sure.
Right.
But they didn't call it that exactly. So, you know, but yes, of course. Thomas Morton was a major figure in that. It wasn't just the Puritans who fled from persecution to the Americas. It was also many witches and pagans were being persecuted, especially under King James.
Mm-hmm. And that
and they came.
When was the because one of the key elements is when the Malleus Maleficarum, I always butcher it, Maleficarum was written, and wasn't that in the 1600s as well?
Maleficar. Yeah, that was on the order of King James. That was his handbook for persecutions. That he engaged a couple of Dominicans, Springer and what were their names? The names escape me offhand. Springer and something or other.
Well, Kramer
but
wrote it.
Yes, it was a horrible thing. Kramer and Springer. That's Kramer.
Mr. Kramer wrote the book, and it was more directed towards women than it was actual witches. I mean, if you really break it down, he was attacking women. The feminist aspect, feminine aspect.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the Catholic Church refused to use the book 3 years after its publication. Now, did you want to talk about that at all, Cole? Because I know the Catholic Church itself refused to use it, but you were telling me the other day certain priests picked it up and...
Okay, so the Catholic Church, when they found out how the Inquisition was going... how it was, how horrible that they were actually treating the people that they were trying to convert. They asked the leaders, the Spaniards to actually stop, and they wanted to regroup and figure out how to make this more humane.
Right.
And they were denied immediately. The Spanish king told the priests that were actually doing the Inquisition that he would pay them everything. Like, he would give them riches upon riches, and said, start your own church. And they became a different sect of the Catholic Church. They were no longer under the ruling of the Pope. The Pope had no control after that over that. So, though the Catholic Church did start the Inquisition, it didn't finish it.
It shut it down, essentially, other than the priests that went rogue.
Well, no, it lost complete control, really.
Okay.
It didn't even get to shut it down, because they just got pushed out of the way.
Well, it went under the Dominican order, but you got to remember that the last pope was the Dominican order today, and he's still alive. And the Dominicans, they were the ones who ran the Inquisition. The last pope was technically the Grand Inquisitor of modern times. You know, from Torquemada to what's his name? Anyway, Benny, I guess, Benedict. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible history, though. It's just horrible. It's right up there with the Holocaust and all. It was a Holocaust. It was. They really wanted to eradicate the competition, and it wasn't just the religious competition. There was an alliance with the new male medical profession as well to get rid of the female practitioners of midwifery and herbalism and the healing arts and all, because it was the whole anti-women thing on every level. That's really what was the core of it. It was a fear and a hatred of women, which I think us modern pagans find inexplicable. I mean, why would you want to hate and fear women? But they did.
Well,
I guess because they wouldn't follow orders.
We have a name for them today, and they're called incels, involuntary celibate.
Yes.
And incels today, as of last year, the Homeland Security has actually started labeling terrorists because of the fact that a lot of your mass shooters today are incels. These are the ones that can't protect a woman and hate women for that fact. And they hate the guys that these women go for. So when you look at it from that perspective, Mr. Kramer was an incel. And he wrote a book on how to torture them.
That's right.
It had nothing to do with witches, because we know damn well no one was practicing witchcraft in Salem. they were all like we're talking before the show. The ones the ones the kids didn't like, or the ones the neighbors didn't like. None of them were witches.
Let me offer one correction to that. There was one real practitioner, and she survived, and that was Tituba the slave herself. That's the only one. Just to let you know.
Right.
They've tried to make her not part of getting that other. So from our point of view, from that sort of thing, Salem, when you get into Salem, I spent some time there, really was a hysteria of the law. And it was really all about, and people are spending lifetimes. I mean, for 100 years, for hundreds of years now, people are always looking into this because it was so outrageously strange. And there were more of these. I mean, there was like 7 or 8, 9 of them just in that same area at the same period of time. But it became documented. And the thing that happened is the most documented trial of its kind. And even today, we still reel at it, and probably saved a lot of women from being killed on the West. You could be hung for being a horse thief, but glad we stopped hanging people as witches in America at Salem for the biggest part.
And that's the thing. They call them, they keep talking about witch burnings. Nobody was burnt. They were all hung. That was how they killed back then.
Not good.
I mean, when did they ever... Do you guys know if they ever burnt witches in England?
They did in Scotland.
In Scotland, okay.
It was mostly the mainland.
Yeah, Scotland. Germany, France, and the mainland Scotland, of course. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't really directed so much at witches as it was against Jews. The interesting thing is that the very year that we hail as the year that Columbus discovered the Caribbean was the year 1492 that Torquemada threw all the Jews out of Spain. And we tend to forget that part of it, that that's what was going on back home in Spain.
So let me give you a perspective that brings you right into the modern society, that by the early 19th century, the idea of being a witch was something that was illegal, a fraud, or anything else. And that's when you started seeing a more, as America became a little bit more progressive, you saw women and other groups and people like Oberon, who was the first in modern times to reuse the word pagan in an official status, really build up. And we had to do it under that stigma of what you're talking about that has been around for hundreds of years against being that sort of social manipulation, that social engineering of the churches and the governments to be able to create a sort of instant terror moment that they can get the mob to react. And so the witch and pagan and all of those words became those trigger words.
Right.
There were a few significant moments about that. There was Leland's publication of Herodia, the Gospel of the Witches, in 1880 something, and that kind of established the existence of witches, not just as scary Halloween figures, but as having a religion. They referred to it as a religion at that time. It was called the Gospel of the Witches. And that had quite a splash, but its splash was mainly in two areas. One, there was the cunning folk, which were basically what we would call witches and wizards today. That's what they called themselves, and that's what everybody else called them. But they weren't particularly literate. They were just kind of itinerant practitioners. They would do healing and fortune telling and stuff like that. And then, at that time, at the turn of the century, was the beginning of the new magical renaissance of the great magical lodges, and they picked up on this stuff in the literary sense, and that really exploded with Margaret Murray and her books on the witch cult of Western Europe and that stuff. So that was in the 30s, and suddenly there was this idea that witches were had been a cult, had been an actual cult of real people, not just individual people out there, which was mostly what witches actually were. It was just individual village herbalists and healers and midwives. But this established the idea that they were an organized religious cult of some sort. And that's what got picked up on by Gerald Gardner and the people that he got involved with at that time, who were kind of trying to revive this this legendary semi-cult, which has never really been proven exactly, not as a religious cult of any organization. Witches in a village were not a religious functionary. They weren't a priestess, or they didn't have a congregation. The villagers weren't witches. They were just practitioners. That's why it's called the craft. They were practitioners like the village blacksmith, the village potter. You know, there was your village witch, you know, and she did that witchy stuff, mostly midwifery and midwifery, and herbal healing. But with Gardner, he was really interested in actual cults and religions that were functioning. He picked up a lot of that stuff in his time in Malaysia. And when he got back to the States, he connected briefly with Aleister Crowley in his final days. And Crowley wanted to pass on to him the mantle of the Golden Dawn. He was, really looking for somebody to carry it on. And they corresponded a bit, and they had one brief meeting very shortly before Crowley died, and actually pretty shortly Gardner died, actually, to try to convey this stuff. So Gardner got a lot of Crowley's poetry and writings and magical stuff, but he didn't really want to revive the magical lodge per se. He wasn't interested so much in being a magician. But he found the religious aspect, the cultic aspect, to be really fascinating. And so that's what he did. He took all this material that he had gathered from his travels as well as from Crowley and other sources and wove it into the framework of this Margaret Murray's mythological witch cult, and created a new religion, a new witchcraft, which had ancient roots and claimed ancient origins, but really was a complete fabrication done in the 40s and early 50s, when when the Witchcraft Act went away in England in 54. He then became public. He had written a book or two before that, kind of hinting around this, High Magic's Aid and that. But then finally it became okay to be public. And so he went out, and all he was doing in the early days was doing initiations. People were coming and paying money to him and later on to Sanders for nothing other than initiations. That was the whole deal. They would come in and they would get initiated, and they had their 3-degree system, and that was it. It wasn't until. Sorry?
What I found interesting about Gardner, too, is if I recall in some of the study I did on him, didn't he get his group, his coven together, and they actually did magic against Hitler to keep him from coming into England?
Yes, that is the story. And the story is that at Lughnasadh, 1st of August, 1945, the witches of England that were pretty much all Gardnerian initiates, all got together and did a group working to prevent Hitler from crossing. There have been several accounts of this that have come out, and historical analysis, and several very excellent novels that have been written on the subject. And it even figured in a Disney movie called Bedknobs and Broomsticks, So it was a major event. It was also said that the witches had done the same thing to stop the Spanish Armada in the time of Queen Elizabeth. So there's a little bit of history there. And in any case, it worked. Hitler did not cross. It was also said that several of the people died as a result of that working. They put so much energy into it. But it's one of the legends of the craft, the details of which are shrouded in mystery. That's okay. So is the whole craft.
Absolutely.
So, for disclosure, I'm a Gardnerian 3rd degree myself. I'm known for my Corellian work, that is much more of the craft. There's a very distinction difference between some of the modern Wiccan movements and some of the older BTWs, British Traditional Wiccan Forces, and it's both remarkable and everything else. But yeah, that's how it is, and so. We got to talking, and I think one of the next phases for me that was really important in my own studies will be the emergence of these 60s. You saw the hippie movement. You started seeing nature movements come in. You started seeing a lot of these college students, not just, everybody says, oh, did they just played with acid and screwed their minds up? No, they were starting to see some really profound things. And you saw people like Oberon Zell, Isaac Bonowitz. You saw Phaedra, and if Phaedra was out at the edges of it, you saw a lot. You saw, especially in the women's movement, you saw the Susan B. Anthony Coven form. You saw a lot of that stuff. Oberon sat there at the beginning of all this and saw a lot of this form up. But if it weren't for those 60s movement, that feminist movement, that desire to reclaim femininity, the witch movement, that I think is probably as foundational as any other part of it. So you have this great practices, but you also had the feminist movement really forming up and really feeling people could be empowered.
Right.
There's a phenomenon that I seem to have been the first to have noted, although more people are picking up on other aspects of it, that there is a 60-year cycle of cultural renaissances. Mm-hmm. And like clockwork, starting with the Italian Renaissance of the 1480s, going to the Reformation of the 1540s, the English Renaissance of the 1600s, the Scientific Revolution of the 1660s, the Great Awakening of the 1720s, the Age of Reason and the French and American Revolutions of the 1780s, the Transcendentalist movement of the 1840s, and the Golden Dawn at the turn of the century. And then, of course, it brings us to the psychedelic 60s, the New Age. Each of these times has a name to it: the Golden Age, the New Age, the Enlightenment, the Awakening, things like that. They're always given these kind of names, and these are profound times where movements are generated that affect the world from that point forward. And in so many ways, we echo back to all of the things that we think are significant innovations of culture and history occurred initially in those moments of time. And there's backlashes as well. There was much backlashes each time these happened. In the 60s, the New Age Revolution was all the movements: the Civil Rights Movement, the Sexual Freedom Movement, the Free Speech Movement, the Psychedelic Movement, the Women's Movement, the Gay Rights Movement, and of course the Pagan Movement and the revival of witches came out of an era that could not have happened 10 years earlier. In the 50s, none of that would have been possible.
Oh, no.
You know, and so that's an aspect I think that's really crucial, is that we have to keep in mind that these things have historical timing, which of course brings us to the present moment. We are now at the dawn of another one of these 60-year cycles. And interestingly, we've entered it with a kind of a clearing of a, like the night vigil before you go off on the great quest, when the whole world has been brought to a standstill in the year that the world stood still,
Right.
That kind of a thing. And that's very significant, because what that means, when such times like this happen, the house is burned down, all the dice are thrown up in the air, what emerges out of that has the potential of becoming something new and magnificent. The legend of the phoenix, the idea of the a rising of all these terms. Of the awakening is the name that's been given to this current cycle, and not the first time that name has been applied, because Renaissance means rebirth, also. So there is that sense that permeates these. And if we're aware of this cycle, and if we're aware of what's been done in the past, and if we've lived through one of the former cycles, we have a much better handle on how to shepherd the new one into being and to foster it. Because by the end of this cycle, those of us who were here the last time around are probably not going to be around anymore. But at this time, the few of us who have survived have the opportunity to be the old, wise old sages and mages and witches and wizards, whose job it is in the stories to mentor the young heroes of the new cycle. Cool.
Mm-hmm. So, how did witchcraft develop from the 1600s to the 1900s? Is that when most actual witches went into hiding?
Well, those who survived. Back in the early days, as I say, there isn't really any indication that witches were any kind of an organized religious movement at all. It was just a craft. That's why it's called the craft of the communities. And they continued to survive in pretty much the same way. When they stopped getting hung or burned at the stake or whatever, they continued to be, doing their practice around the villages as wise men and wise women and cunning men and cunning women and so on like that. But then that's the way it was clear up until the 20th century, when Gardner turned it into something different. He proclaimed witchcraft as the old religion, which is technically totally incorrect, but it caught on that way because it was useful to be able to claim a religion and gain the freedom of religion under those countries that guaranteed freedom of religion, which was not a lot of them, but America was for that. So being able to claim you have a religion, you can pretty much get away with almost anything in this country, at least.
So there's also a prejudice. So there's a modern day hyper-reality in the belief that there was some sort of continuous process, because it forces an academia or a records keeping or some proof or evidence of it to an oral tradition, to oral people. And that's one of the big things the colleges used to keep any sort of real magic out. And when they had real magic, they had Newton's. We had Newton's books on magic that were destroyed by his family at the end of his life. And anytime they've had opportunity to bring that sort of academic in it, they've destroyed it. And finally, something happened to break our society. Today, we have actually, in my belief, more people who make the claim, personal identity of witches than any time in history. And of course, that would be true of the modern term of pagan. But as far as witches
unquestionably, the statistics and surveys of that are reported in religiostolerance.org, it's one of the best ones that keeps track of all the different religions around, have indicated that the same number of people identify themselves as witches who identify themselves as pagans. But pagans is an overall larger term that includes witches, like Christians includes Catholics, Methodists, and Baptists. Pagans includes witches and druids and shamans and all kinds of people. So that's the umbrella category. But about half of that category identify these days as witches, which is significant. But here's the real kicker. We didn't really realize when we were getting the pagan movement going in the 60s, and I do have to, I guess, claim to have been the one who kickstarted that by being the first to claim the term. Nobody had ever claimed the term pagan as a self-identifier. It was always those other people, those pagans over there. You know, nobody ever said we're pagans until I did on September 7th, 1967. And at that time, the Church of All Worlds was just coming out and being public after about 5 years of being kind of a little underground secret society. And we were debating on whether to do that to become public or not. And we finally decided to do both, to retain the secret Water Brotherhood and also create a public persona. And I was selected to head that up. And then somebody asked me, what kind of a religion is this? What kind of church is this Church of All Worlds thing? And because there were lots of churches popping out of the woodwork back in the mid-'60s. There were the Scientologists and the Krishna consciousness people and the Moonies and more than I can even keep track of. Right. And so they wanted to know, are you some kind of Christian cult? Are you one of these Eastern groups? What are you? And I said, well, I guess you could say we're pagans, because I'd always had a fascination with ancient myths and legends and pagan lore and customs and all of that stuff. And that's just how I thought of it. And nobody had ever claimed that before, so that was a big deal. But at that time, and for the next several years, as the pagan movement got caught hold and the word spread, and I'd hear about other groups, Isaac's Druids over at Carleton College. They were all college groups, almost all of them. So a bunch of people doing Egyptian stuff somewhere else. And I reached out to these people, and I'd hear about them, and I'd say, you guys, sorry?
I was going to explain to millennials what happened to Oberon is he had a viral moment, but it was word of mouth versus pictures. That's all. I was just translating millennials. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Well, anyway, I would reach out to these people and say, you guys seem like pagans, and, we're pagans. Let's all be pagans together. And they'd go, yeah, right. That's what we are. We're pagans. But the witches did not come into that at that time, because the witches, there was a mythos about witchcraft and witches, which is still prevalent in the popular mind. And that is that witches are not a religion, or it's not something that you can choose to join or study in and become initiated in. Witches are like a subspecies of human, like vampires or fairies or elves or werewolves or something else. They're not quite the same. And all of the stories in the popular myth, from I Married a Witch to Bell Book and Candle to Bewitched to Bedknobs and Broomsticks, every single media, movie, TV series, everything that came out, that was the mythos. And it still is in the current TV series that are about the witches of this and that, the other things, all of them, the craft and practical magic and all these TV series, they all have that myth. And this was reinforced by the first three people who wrote their autobiographies. Sybil Leek, Justine Glass, and Louise Huebner all wrote autobiographies as witches, and they said the same thing. They said, oh, well, it has to be passed down the bloodline in the family. There was no mention in any of them of it being a religion or a group or anything you could join or train. There was no mention of covens or anything bigger than that. It was just our family. I'm a witch. My grandmother was a witch, and she passed it down in the bloodline. And that's all we knew about witches until the Bucklands showed up. When Ray and Rosemary Buckland came over to with the commission from Gerald Gardner to bring witchcraft to the colonies, as it were, that was the first time that witches actually appeared on the scene as actual people, really, in any real sense. Then they immediately signed up, and the first big argument that happened, there was two big ones that took place in those days, and I chronicle all of these because I was publishing Green Egg magazine. The first one was whether witches wanted to claim themselves as pagans, and some did and some didn't. And even today, Maxine Sanders is adamantly anti-pagan. She says, I'm not a pagan, I had quite an argument with her about that a couple of years ago. But the other big argument, of course, is whether or not covens could be all male or all female or gay or whatever. And both of these eventually got settled out. Most of the witches decided to become part of the pagan movement, and pretty much everybody decided that gays were fine. So these things resolve themselves kind of nicely. That was a lot. You go ahead and ask somebody else something.
Oh no, you're fine. You're great to listen to. Go ahead, Ed.
But let me offer. I can offer a little bit more depth. So when the day Raymond, Dr. Buckland came over, whom was a fascinating person to know, was also John McCole, and that was my initiator. And and so you had in like Chicago and New York, you had the Pagan Way as well. And that was, they were all working towards the idea of an open mind. And really where it came together, Green Egg magazine, let me offer, really penetrated the psyche by being on mainstream books. Remember, I read Green Egg magazine. It was one of the things I read. I've been a pagan since I became a witch when I was a teenager, more or less, and I've got a complicated story. And so, but what it did do is that more mainstream, you saw them going onto the stage. You saw more of them talking in public. You saw them talking at college. You started seeing them being allowed to speak, and they weren't going to be quiet. Mm-hmm. I met Oberon with my Aunt Sandra at a speech he did in Chicago in 1973. Just different things of that. And they've been taking this lifelong. So you've got this generation that is just passing, and going to be around for a little while. Oberon, we demand him to be around to at least 125. Then we really know he's the wizard. And but this idea that they now have their story, and now there's a generation behind them that are telling their stories as well as creating more systems in place. And I think you see this idea of growing towards what did Oberon really want us to be? He wanted us to be able to proclaim what we want to do freely. Then I think people who have followed in his path have had to ask the question, what do we do next? What are we? And I think Oberon, having survived so many things, has been such a person, has given us at least a living role model in dealing with some of these ideas. And so have a lot of the elders. Mm-hmm. But they have also gave us permission to be far more public. Every generation since then has felt more and more public. Every year has felt more public. And we've seen the growth because of that. Hmm?
Well, you really saw growth in the 70s with, you've got, I think, Circle Sanctuary started in the 70s. I believe Aquarius Tabernacle Church here in Washington started in 73 with Pete Davis Pathfinder, Pete Pathfinder Davis. Right. Sacred Well out of Texas, I believe, started in the 70s.
Temple of Wicca. The first temple of Wicca out of Chicago, 1976. Yeah.
Right. You saw the big explosion in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. We did. There's been actually a succession of different ways that this has happened. The first era, the 60s, was primarily about getting our feet under us, the founding of all these groups and movements and coming together and finding out about each other, and brand new ones. All of them started up in that period, except the early witches who got their start in the 50s. But by the time, but they were the only ones that go back that far, other than a few kind of interesting little pop-ups like the Gleb Botkin's Church of Venus in the 30s, or Norman Lindsay's attempt in Australia in the 20s. But they didn't really go anywhere. They weren't self-perpetuating. But in the 60s, it started happening. And then what happened in the 70s, it became a time when people started having festivals and meeting each other physically. The very earliest ones appeared in that period of time. PSG and Starwood and some of these that are now 40 years old. And that was pretty cool. And publications, of course, was a big thing at that time. So there were a number of little newsletters and publications. And Green Egg, it seems to have been the most prominent one, primarily because we were non-denominational. We weren't just a newsletter of the Church of All Worlds. We were a newsletter of the pagan movement. So we published everybody's manifestos and everybody's letters and communications and ideas. And the entire community essentially owned it. At least they felt that sense of ownership of it and participated that way. So that was significant. And then in the 80s, we started getting into, more widespread groups and organizations and communications. In the 90s, we got the internet with the bulletin boards and stuff, and the beginning of that. In the 2000s, we started getting into, new levels of virtual worlds, and pagan businesses started appearing and thriving in the 90s and continuing on. And bookstores and all these things started popping up. It's been developing slowly over more than 50 years into an amazing full-fledged movement with all the dimensions. And now to go to a pagan festival, well, obviously not this year, but up until this year and hopefully after this year, it's like going into another whole world.
But pagans did go to festivals.
You got vendors, you got workshops, you got music, you got rituals. It's all going on. It's wonderful.
Yeah, but we did have festivals this year. We did make two. We did make that technical
we did.
jump. Yeah, we did.
I think we did. I think it's magnificent.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I think in light of your 2020, the idea of the 60-year Renaissance and the way pagans communicate, one of the things I offer is, so we're talking about American witches. Let's go ahead and just talk about it. Actually, I'm famous for my articles and my predictions, and they've hit pretty well. Wherever you put the number right now, 1.7 or 2.1 million, I give you my projections.
According to the surveys reported in Tolerance.org, the current size of the pagan community is fairly reliably estimated at about 4 million, possibly a little bit more than that. And there's good technical stuff that the surveys that have been done over the years and the tracking, which makes paganism, including witchcraft, today the second largest religion in America. The only one bigger is Christianity, with like 70-some million people. It's a lot bigger, but every other religion, Judaism, Islam, is less than 4 million, like a lot less. Judaism was like about 3 million, and Buddhism like 2, and it goes on down from there. We're big. We're significant. Second movement. In the strange thing about this is that for such large and significant movement, was so out there about us. I mean, the organism, fill bookstores. I mean, I've been to Llewellyn's headquarters, and it's a huge warehouse of titles, thousands of titles of books that are constantly putting out there, and TV shows that have done with interviews, real life stuff, and festivals and events. You would think that everybody would know about us because I don't know how we could be any more public than we are, and yet somehow we seem to remain invisible to the general public, which I think is remarkable.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about, the security of paganism, probably in the last hour, because it is remarkable. But what disturbs me is still the hate is still the discrimination, is still the attacks that we have on pagans by the ignorant. And, it's a fact that paganism in general is growing. More and more people are getting disillusioned by religion in general, so they are turning to paganism, which is significant considering we don't proselytize. But I think what's important is dispelling the myths.
know. That's a universal thing. We totally agree.
I mean, we don't go running around door to door and asking people if they want to be a witch or a pagan. I mean, you might get slapped if you did. But
Well,
Right.
well, can I offer a different inflection on that?
sure.
I've never
Sure.
had to. By far, I probably have empowered more teachers than practically any other Wicca witch out there with the witch school system, and overall, I've been able to extend to the world a very friendly, a very open type of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot more that go deeper. There's a lot of it. And never once have I had to go out and advertise. I mean, I do some advertising. I do some of that as a business and as a way to raise subscription money because it's 501c3. But never have we, every day, 10 people at the door, knock, knock, knock. Can I learn to be a witch? And that's always been true since the day the site formed.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so there's such a demand for this material, the idea of proselytization is unnecessary.
Well, I don't see that as proselytizing.
Well, that's true.
Because,
No, we don't.
how do I put this? You live by example.
Exactly.
You live by example. People see your pinnacle. People see your world tree. People see your ankh, whatever you're wearing. They get curious, and they ask.
They do.
What's your belief?
Yeah,
And
they
you
do.
say, I'm a witch.
Yep.
And you either get the
Well,
oh my God, you're a devil worshiper, or they start asking questions.
Yeah, and the devil worshiper thing is diminishing because people are more and more, if they consider themselves sophisticated or enlightened at all, then they like to be able to say that, well, I know enough about this to know that you guys aren't devil worshippers, and you guys are like, tree huggers and stuff like that. And I always wear my pinnacle out, and I encourage everybody who can afford to do so to do likewise, because it's amazing what happens. You'll have people coming out of the woodwork and pulling their pinnacle out of their shirt, or in the most amazingly obscure places. So you go into the maitre d' or the manager will come up and say, "I like your jewelry," and then they'll tear it off. And it's an amazing little secret signaling system we've got here that we recognize each other. That's growing, especially. I mean, this is huge in the schools. I don't think we fully appreciate this, but you get one kid goes to school wearing a pentagram, and the first time this used to happen, it's not so much anymore, I don't think, but then they would run into a problem with that. These people say, "Oh,
You still with us,
I
Albert?
would have a conversation with the principal." Yep, and the next day, the kid would come back to school still wearing their pentacle. They had beaten the system. And then the other kids want to know, well, what's all that about, because they have defied the system and won, and they become the cool kids. So these days, the kids with the pentacles are not the siders. They're the kids in the school that other kids want to hang out with and be around. It's changed completely from, when I was young with that, So, and it's happening that way throughout the culture. One of the big, profound breakthroughs that I remember having was I was at a political meeting where somebody was being installed as a local politician in our town who happened to be a pagan and a friend of our community. And he had a nun and a pagan priestess come and do the swearing in of his new office. And we all came down and we wore suits and stuff, and kind of hovering around the background. We was kind of listening and overheard what all these people were talking about. They were watching this stuff, and one guy said, "So what's this pagan thing? Who are these pagans?" And so the guy said, "Oh, pagans, that's a green," and it was like, yeah, that's it. That is exactly the right way to think of us. We on politics, comics, we got green energy, and we got green religion, and that's us.
Yeah. I think you're in the heart of the windstorm because you keep cutting out. We're catching what you're saying.
As a non-pagan, I do gotta say one of the hardest things about
it's quiet here.
Learning about you guys is the fact that there are so many different views and sects that I can't. You can't walk up to someone and say, "What are you?" It's
right.
Rude.
And so that's a perfect point, and it brings. I gotta know. So, Abron, you were a part of the American Witches Council in 1974, but it only lasted a year. Why is that?
That's right. Well, it only was created for one single. But there was no more need for it. It wasn't an ongoing council. It was a meeting. It was like the Parliament of World Religions. It was a one-time meeting. And the purpose was to come up with a set of fundamental principles and precepts that would be generally agreed on by all the witches. Well, practically speaking, all of the witches. There were 77 people who attended that. And I'm pretty sure that I have the only complete list, and it took me years to reconstruct it. But I have a complete list of everybody who was there. And the 13 principles and precepts it was of contemporary witchcraft were created there. And they're excellent. They've stood up all this time. They've held up, and there really has never been any argument, and there's never been any need to redo it because it was done well. But it was kind of neat because it was hosted by Llewellyn up in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And it was also the occasion of Morning Glory and my hand fasting. We had met the previous fall. This was at spring, at Easter weekend, actually, spring equinox, which happened to come right at Easter weekend. And so our hand fasting was huge. It was the first big public pagan wedding ever. Isaac Bonowitz was the priest, and Carolyn Clark was the priestess. And they both had long hair down to their waist. And during the ceremony, as they did working around the central altar, both of them managed to set their long hair on fire. It was quite impressive. Everybody cheered, "Do it again!" So that's where he got the concept of the old flaming priestess or flaming priest trick. So, but it was quite an epic event. It was filmed by Japanese television. It was huge. The ritual that Morning Glory and I created for that. See, before that, there had not been any legal Wiccan or pagan churches that were legally in clergy, some priestesses of their group, but there was no legally incorporated group. We were the first one to do that. And so when we ordained people, they had full legal status, and they were therefore able to conduct legal marriages. But there hadn't been any established in ritual beforehand. There were no marriage ceremonies in the craft or other groups. We were the first ones. And that became a template. We published it in Green Egg. It became a template for the whole pagan community for hand fastings. And I remember decades later that we were some festival, and some folks were getting hand fasted. The priestess asked if Morning Glory, and she said sure, and they handed her the script.
So, can I offer an insight to basically Oberon's and as an 11-year-old? I'm sorry. Oh, is Oberon still talking? He's
cutting out. You still hear Oberon?
I can hear you fine. I don't know what's cutting out.
Oh, okay. So let me offer an insight for me as an 11-year-old. I had met that. The American Witches Council, the contemporary rules and everything else, was more like people don't understand how magical communities work. We don't consolidate like hierarchies. We're not militant in that same way. We're not like, one of the reasons we don't proselytize is because we're much more organic in our growth. Mm-hmm. And yes, there have been these hidden groups, and these have been these ideas have hidden there, and they hid inside what grandmother's saying, kiss her, made her child feed the fairies on her land for whatever things. These sort of little grandmotherly arts. There's all sorts of ways we kept magic alive. What the contemporary witchcraft movement did at that moment, it said to everybody, wow, there's a group of people taking on the responsibility to lead us witches. Now, we did not know that it didn't last for a year. I was 11 years old. This echoed, and still echoes to the day, as being this supersized event. It's like if you had an explosive moment, right, like, the Hiroshima or, the start of a war or anything else that we had a date for, that date along with the 1970, or Charles Darwin said, of Earth Day, all of those movements came together, and it created at least an identity of we're all together. Now, and it was more hyper reality. It was more fictional than true because they all fell apart. And everybody's had that desire to have that moment of unity, that one perfect moment of unity. Because we saw it again in 2018 at the Parliament. We've seen it once or twice, but not to the degree that it actually branded itself to the point of having a set of rules, a set of ideals, more a set of virtues that all the younger witches that are coming in. And remember, if we're big today, people don't believe me, check my record. I am so good at this. We're looking at probably 8 to 10 million pagans, most of them in study, most of them coming out of the panels in America. And half of that, I agree with Oberon, half of that being Wiccan, and the other half being the other groups. Mm-hmm. I think by 2025, I see the growth there. And that's mostly, and COVID has really helped push it because it's now pushing us to make connections. And if we just, it's always been this way. And I think we're going to see, again, a massive amount of growth, and it'll be how our system's told. The thing nice about the way that paganism got some of this energy is that you don't have to have a church. You don't have to be a part of a larger group. It's okay to be just your small pagan group, your pagan family, your pagan coven, your pagan circle. No, that's irrelevant. At the end of the day, you form pagan, and the actual movement of paganism versus, say, Wicca, or my tradition, currently witchcraft, Wicca, which is very rigid. We have a hierarchy. We have it all. If you really like royal paganism, royal witchcraft, we do it all. But this idea of being able to be whoever you want to be within a certain confines of being a great movement, a great religion, relies a lot on what the earlier people were working on. And now it's become so attractive and so frictionless to get information across. I think it's going to expand at a truly, not quite exponential, which is where I think it's going to eventually be, but to be at least geometric in its growth over the next 5 years. We're going to go from 2 to 4 million to 10 million.
And so looking at the military side, I can only speak about the Army because I don't know about the rest of the
I'm aware that it's not.
Say again?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, go ahead with that. I think that's a good
So
track.
the
Where were you
military
going?
side, up until it really wasn't, until Fort Hood came up with the Fort Hood Open Circle, Wicca in the military, in the Army, wasn't so accepted. Even, I know you guys know about Representative Barr coming out in the media saying, oh, witchcraft doesn't belong in the Army, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, Governor Bush, before he became president, was the same thing. I would encourage the military not to recognize witchcraft as a belief system for the soldiers. But
yeah, it was the whole pinnacle on the tombstones thing too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll get to that. That's a whole other topic. That's a topic that pisses me off because I was involved with that. But because I'm more the military pagan side. I can tell you all about military pagan topics. But it's sad because the chaplain's corps is supposed to have paganism as one of their topics they learn about. So when you go up to any chaplain, you should know that they know who you are, what you believe, but about 80% of them don't. They automatically think you're a Satanist. I've had a chaplain call a soldier a Satanist for being Wiccan.
Wow.
And they don't track numbers. I think the last estimate was 2 million, if that claimed Wicca. So when I was talking to a chaplain about having a pagan breakfast, because they have Christian prayer breakfast once a month, and I wanted to establish a pagan breakfast. And the chaplain was all excited at first, and he said, "Oh, I will help you sponsor it, blah, blah, blah." And the very next day he came back and said, "We're not allowed to have prayer breakfast anymore, so I can't sponsor you." Well, I went ahead and did it. But he was amazed because he told me, well, there's only like 200 Wiccans in the military. And I told him, well, most of us probably put down either other or no religious preference. So when you look at those numbers, he said, well, there's 10,000 of those. Like,
right.
Yeah. Well, you can guarantee that the 200 numbers you have is probably more like 2,000. And, you know.
Well, yep.
That's exactly that. And that's what the surveys say, too. The surveys say that, well, there's probably many, many more people than they indicated, but most of us don't publicly want to be identified. So we put down other or no,
Absolutely.
None of the above or no preference or something like that. But as it's becoming more permissible.
And with the military, it's because of the way we're treated.
More people are claiming it.
Yep. And with that,
Right.
we got to go to our first break. So we have when we come back, we're gonna go ahead and jump over and start talking about some witch traditions and Wiccan traditions.
Already.
So stay tuned.
You are listening to S4 on Spreaker.com.
Welcome back to S4 with your host, Eric Cooper.
And welcome back to S4. Tonight we are talking American Witches with Oberon and Ed, and we're going to move on to a plethora of Wiccan traditions. Oh.
Sounds good.
So, there's a saying, all Wiccans are witches, but not all witches are Wiccan. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. It's fundamental for me.
I agree.
Wait a minute. It's a very important aspect to it. And it goes back to what Oberon's talked about in the first hour, which is seen as a craft. Witch is seen as a craft. Wiccan is seen as a number of, it's a faith. It's seen as a faith. And there's a big difference between those two. Now, Wiccans do practice witchcraft. Now, that's the real essential part.
Right. It's like saying that all Catholics are Christians, but all Christians are not Catholics. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was a little mention earlier in the previous.
That is not true at all. I
Say
am
what?
Catholic. I am a Catholic, and I am not a Christian. That is not the same thing.
Yeah, Catholicism and Christianity are two completely
Non-Christian
separated.
Catholic?
Yes, they're two completely
Roman
separated.
Catholic, so absolutely non-Christian Catholic. Just because we follow
Now
the
that
life
is
of
something
Christ,
I never heard. I always.
Just because we follow the life of Christ does not mean we are Christians. Christians do not believe that the Old Testament holds any knowledge, that it holds anything but historical documents. There is no. It pretty much believes the whole stories, all the stories in there are fake. There's no belief in it.
But I think
So when we look at the broad category of Christianity, you're saying that somebody else, Catholics should not be included under that umbrella of.
No,
There's something
not at all.
No.
Because the Roman Catholic Church was started before the movement of Christianity. Christianity did not start as a religion; it started as a movement.
I've always seen the Christians and Catholics as separate, but that's
They
just
are.
always been.
Yeah,
That's just always been
it's two
my
totally
perception of
separate
it.
religions.
Ah,
That would be like saying that
No, I'm not-
Judaism falls under the Christian umbrella. And it
And since,
yeah.
that's cool, because I don't think me and Oberon
Judy?
we don't have any horse in that play. I've heard of this, Oberon. This is something that I've seen a number of times. The idea this is a more of something that's internal to Christianity than it is to us.
Subset of Christianity?
Yes. Christianity, Judaism, and Catholicism are just as separate from Christianity as Islamism is.
Yeah. Let's see.
So basically monotheistic Abrahamic religions, i.e. Christianity, Judaism, and then there's Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
They are all separate entities.
Wow.
Except I do see Islam is walking parallel to Christianity.
Never heard that.
Since I don't argue the faith that I don't belong to, it's interesting. So, but let's get back to the point that you were making about the fact. So, witchcraft is practice, or witch magic and shamanism has a very common root, and that is in our belief that our will can affect the reality around us, and that if we learn natural law, the way the world works, we can make ourselves better, heal ourselves, learn more, and become more and more in tune with what we would call universal intelligence, God. For a lot of Wiccan traditions, it's Lord and Lady. But ultimately, the witch is the protector of secrets. They are something they go into to help them understand a world that they can't understand, either through sickness or through the pain have a broken heart. So the witch has always been the consoler and healer.
Right.
But at the same time, they've had this wicked image of being the guardian, the protector, and the anger. Hecate will take off, and there's this sort of idea that they will come after you if you wrong them or their own. So there's also this fear. So you have in our common society elaborated through Hollywood this idea of it. And so Wiccan traditions, pagan traditions, witch traditions come in all sorts of forms when you see people identifying it. And that's one of the reasons I think it makes witches almost another sort of macro title, like pagans, to that group of not necessarily pagan witches. But the pagan witches are by far the largest group active in the world today. Mm-hmm.
So, personally,
go
ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say that if you're interested, I do have up on my right now these 13 principles of Wiccan belief that were adopted in 1974 that was such an historical thing, and I'd be happy to share them with you if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, here they are. Okay, number 1, we practice rites to attune ourselves with a natural rhythm of life forces, marked by the phases of the moon and the seasonal quarters and cross quarters. Number 1, because is kind of universal, not just to witches, but to all the pagans as well. Right. Number 2, we recognize that our intelligence gives us a unique responsibility towards our environment. We seek to live in harmony with nature, in ecological balance, offering fulfillment to life and consciousness within an evolutionary concept.
And again, that's also a...
Any comments on any of these you can...
Oh, yeah. And both of them I see pretty predominant with all pagan beliefs.
Yeah. These are also very much very pagan, too. Most dollar power far greater than that is apparent to the average person, because it is far greater potential to all. Okay. Number 4. We conceive of the creative power in the universe as manifesting through polarity, as masculine and feminine. Creative power lies in all people and functions through the interaction of the masculine and feminine. We value neither above the other, knowing each to be supportive of the other. We value sex as pleasure, as a symbol and embodiment of life, and as one of the sources of physical practice. Again, most of these would apply just as well, I think, to most pagans. So they're not. Number 5, we recognize both outer and inner or psychological worlds, sometimes known as the spiritual world, the collective unconscious, inner planes, etc. Interactions, space, paranormal phenomena, and magical exercises. We neglect neither dimension for the other, seeing both as necessary for our fulfillment. Number 6, we do not recognize any authoritarian hierarchy, but give those who share their greater knowledge and wisdom, and acknowledge those who have courageously given of themselves in leadership. Okay. We see religion and wisdom in living as being united in the way one views the world and lives within it. A worldview and philosophy of life which we identify as witchcraft. Possible here that the Wiccan may not. Number 8, calling oneself witch does not make a witch, but neither does heredity itself, nor the collecting of titles, degrees, and initiations. A witch seeks to control the forces within her or him that make life possible in order to live wisely and well without harm to others and in harmony with nature. That harm none comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. We believe in the affirmation and fulfillment of life in a continuous continuation of evolution and development of consciousness that gives meaning to the universe we know and our personal role within it. Our only animosity towards Christianity or towards any extent that its institutions have claimed to be the only way and have sought to deny freedom to others and suppress other ways of religious practice and belief. Okay. Number 11. As a mere threatened by deeds on history, the origins of various terms, the origins of various aspects of different traditions, we are concerned with our present and our future. Number 12. We do not accept the concept of absolute evil, nor do we worship any entity known as Satan or the devil as defined by Christian tradition. Nor do we accept that personal benefit can be derived only by denial to another. And finally, number 13. We believe that we should seek within nature that which is and there it is, the 13 Principles of Wiccan Belief from the 1974 Spring Witch Moot in Minneapolis.
And again, a majority of those, I would say, are predominant. If you ask for a common denominator with all pagan beliefs, I would say, and I've always believed, the 13 Principles of Witchcraft apply to most of them.
I think they do. The parts that have its own specific variations, you would say that every pagan tradition has its own specific variation for that. Some of them may be reclaiming the heritage of their particular cultural but I think the overall attitudes that are conveyed in this are very universal in the entire pagan community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you look at the big picture, and like you said, you have some Wiccan traditions that'll have their own specific holiday in there, their own Sabbath, really based on which deities they follow. And then you've got some that don't have a deity at all. They only work with nature, or they only work with energy, or they only work with the fae. And then you have some that believe in a god and a goddess. You have the Dianics, the Dianic Wiccans, who only believe in a goddess, and they are pretty much feminine focused. So it becomes very broad. And then you have new traditions that start almost every day. What are some of the newest traditions?
Well, there aren't really as many. There's my little things, but it's like I understand, excluding Catholicism, and I'm still not sure how to address that. The rest of the Christians are generally considered to be hundreds of separate sects and cults, or sects, I guess is what they call them, denominations, and most of them think that all, and we don't think that other traditions are heresies, or they should be exterminated or burned at the stake or anything for having a difference of opinion. Right. That's a pretty big one.
Well, so let me talk about basically traditions. Let me use my own as a representation. Okay.
Sure.
The Karelian native tradition is basically, we adopted technology very early on. We broke away from a lot of groups, and we were amongst the first to help develop schools. We worked to do not only witch school, but we helped a lot of the other schools develop, just like we helped a lot of festivals get on the air. We adopted technology, and we've had this sort of relationship with our technology, and now we have about 300,000 people into the schools, have gone through it, and have taken some sort of class or lesson. We've graduated over 4,000 clergy in the last 20 years. And so we were able, very much as witchcraft was growing, we were able to give them this long-term stable relationship. And a lot of the students go off and form their own groups. You're right. There are a lot of small covens and groups, but they're owing themselves to only really a handful of different traditions that they're modeling after. And I think Llewellyn has done an amazing job of giving us a diversity of materials.
Oh, absolutely.
And other publishers have too. But,
yep.
Amazing,
absolutely.
But I think Llewellyn's the ones who kept the books on they understood the business cycle. Charles's biggest breakthrough was understanding the bookshelf. This sounds so nerdy to people, but he understood the principles of how to keep his book, the amount of shelf space in all these retail stores early in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, where I worked in the discount book industry, and I watched as he was able to keep shelf space for his people by cycling out so many books. And when people criticized him, these were the books people wanted and the people were buying. And he made sure that there was at least some income and some attention. And today, being part of Llewellyn is very prestigious, actually. But there was a while there, he just did what he did. And he was so intelligent to work with the mainstream that happened, that it really helped expand it. And Green Egg is another example of that, because it was on the bookshelves. It wasn't just everywhere. It was out, if you went to the sales, if you went to the new magazine stand, there was Green Egg. And that was a big breakthrough in the way that we see it.
I remember seeing, years ago, I remember seeing Green Egg actually at Barnes & Noble.
That's the whole point.
Yep.
So paganism.
Every bookstore.
So paganism's always found a way to try to reach the mainstream since it's formed, since this modern movement is. And now we're in the middle of the internet phase. We're in the internet now, actually. I call it the proto-matrix, but we won't get into that at the moment. But this year was a big change. And instead of falling backwards, we came in and we unified in a way that I have not seen before. A lot of people, a lot of old connections were reunited. Oberon was everywhere this summer learning. He went from barely using this stuff to having to use Zoom all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Quite there.
Tell me about it.
Oh, yeah, and I've been using Zoom all this year. I do continued education in the Homeland Security side with, IED identification courses and arson investigation courses and whatnot. And so, yeah, Zoom has been I guess the new school. You could go right into that with which school?
Well, yeah. So understand, for me, the big difference between me, because I'm a techno-mage, I've been on Zoom for a couple of years.
Right.
People don't realize it's been around for a long time. It's just when the need mixes. So one of the things I think, let me offer you, because Oberon had Vision 2020 this year, and he got the vote out, and he got what he wanted as much as he can get. And hey, still think Blue Georgia. Let's keep it going. But I know politics. Never mind. But one of the biggest things that it did was the idea of obtaining and re-empowering ourselves. And this is directly to the witch movement. A lot of the people that are calling themselves witches right now are not necessarily anti-pagan or pro-pagan. A lot of them are pagans. A lot of the leadership is pagan. But they're really political. And that we're doing it because there was so much pain and there's so much power into the witch. And now that we've seen this changeover, I think you're going to see a lot of that leadership go from politics of against a dictatorship in their minds to the politics of rights. I think you're going to see a huge advance and continuation of civil rights, witches and pagans in the new civil rights movement that's coming up.
And I do think it's growing, and it's going to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, in at least in Washington,
I think you're right for sure. I totally.
Well, and that's why I know you've been invited to Olatius, and that's great. There used to be a Terra Tacoma, and it was I can't remember what it was, what Terra actually stood for, but it was kind of like a pagan council of the Tacoma community, and it was huge. They were a big part of sponsoring pagan pride events, and they're education, pagan issues, and they dissolved. And as far as the Tacoma Seattle community goes, I think when they dissolved, a lot broke apart. So when you have a leadership that, for a personality or an opinion matter, whatever the case is, when they dissolve, it does break up the community. And now, I mean, last year we had Witch Vox, which to me, Witch's Voice was a huge resource for the pagan community when they shut down.
Oh yes, that's a tragic loss. Tragic loss.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they went to Facebook, but that's not the same.
Yep.
Completely avoidable.
Witch's Voice
was
the.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on that.
I think we need to get to another leadership structure similar to what we had in the 90s and the 2000s.
Well, now that I've moved up here to the Long House in the Pacific Northwest, I am making connections with Olateus in the Northwest Pagans network and all that stuff, and I do intend to do a lot to revitalize that, as I did when I was down in California with the Sonoma County Pagan Network, which is now unfortunately also dissolving, I'm sad to say. But when one door closes, another one opens. When one phoenix burns down, another one emerges from the ashes. So new and better things will continue emerging. It's just the cycle that goes on. It's systole and diastole. This is the way it works. It's organic. It's just an organic flow.
Oh, it's universal energy that
concludes a new generation.
Ignites those fires.
Yep.
And go ahead.
To whatever extent I can be a catalyst, that's kind of, so I will continue doing that as best I can.
Right. And I look forward to it. Tell us about the Grey School of Wizardry. Is that still going?
Oh, yes, school's going. I'm so proud of that. That's it's now. Oh wow, coming up on 17 years now, and I just couldn't be prouder. In fact, I'm slated to do a TED Talk on the Grey School of Wizardry for. Where is it now? Let's see. It's in Bulgaria, I think, someplace like that. Because it's so strange that it's so far out there. Let's see here. Yeah. Just a moment. There we go. The American University in Bulgaria.
Okay.
Yep, that's where I'll be talking. So the Grey School, we've got a couple of dozen amazing teachers, a really terrific administration, and about 300 students. We've been holding 100 solid students for this whole year actually, but it's a good solid 300.